But let me just, I guess we'll start off this way. I'm Jed Miller. I'm pastor of First Baptist Church of Beulah. Like I said, just a minute ago, you're the first interview we'll have. I don't know what order they'll come out because they're all going to start coming out in June, and it's like, what is it, February? It's
Yeah,
February.
yeah, gosh, almost March.
Yes, almost March.
That's why we're in the studio.
That's right.
There's no air conditioner, and we're okay.
Oh, yeah, look, in a month or two, this is not an acceptable compromise. We're going to have to put a fan or an air conditioner or something out here.
Yeah, I think so.
But it's a interesting idea to just sort of gather together pastors and talk about life and get to know everybody and what their ministry is, and sort of give more people a better view of what your ministry is. That being said, this is Jeff Spoonybarger. I will say, before I ever met you, I heard your name around the Pensacola area, like all over the place.
As a cuss word, probably?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, just Spoonybarger. No, I think almost in an entirely positive light. So I knew your brother first because he was a photographer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Whichever one that, I don't know if he's older or younger.
Yeah, he's
but,
the older one.
But he was a photographer. He took some of our engagement photos and used to do like at Olive all the basketball stuff and did that. But I heard your name just sort of bandied about as someone, man, this is a pastor of the area who is really solid, someone we really all love. Everybody had positive things to say about you. And so, man, introduce yourself, sort of talk about who you are, and then we'll banter back and forth a bit.
Oh, thanks. So I'm Jeff Spoonybarger, and it took me 3 years of kindergarten to be able to spell that. So I think I was 12 by the time I got out of elementary school after the delay there. So at this point, I have been out of the pastorate full-time for the last 2 months. So I resigned after 19 years at First Baptist Church of Gulf Breeze. We started Story Point Church and also Mission Costa at the same time. Long story. But yeah, God just did a work, and we can get into it later. But it's been tremendously fun, tremendously free. Now I am engaged in trying to reach men with the Great Commission to be disciple-making disciples.
Okay.
That's my goal. I want to raise up 1 million men whose first priority is the glory of God. And
Okay.
it's a very simple strategy we're going to use, and we're just like literally just starting. So
Where'd you get the heart for that? I mean, like, is it from a sense of like men just aren't doing it? Is it sort of out of sort of the youth ministry context of like our dads just aren't there? So where did it sort of start for you that's where we need to be?
yeah, that's kind of a strange journey from my part, because if you would have asked me 2 years ago, am I going to start a ministry that's specifically geared towards reaching men, I would have told you no. Not that I didn't care about men, it's just that
Sure.
that wasn't my focus. And so the long story short is that a good friend of mine, Benny Prophet, he's the founder of First Priority and First Priority Global.
Yeah.
He and I had been talking for about a year, just trying to find out, what if we worked together, what would we do? What would it look like? And what has God placed in me that fits with what they're doing? And through that year-long conversation, I would go see him every couple of months or so, and we'd spend a day or two together just talking all hours of the night. God just refined inside of my heart that the key, I think, to revival in our country, the key to revival in our homes, the key to healthy churches that are fulfilling the mission of God is men. Because that is an area that, frankly, the church, me included, we have not done a good job at discipling men. And I think a lot of men are dead inside. They're just going through the motions. And, that's not an accusation. That's just
Sure.
An observation that I've made.
Do you think that? So I've always thought, because I very much agree with you that men's ministry, as in so much as many of our churches have it, is sort of flat, if anything. And I've always found that, for me, the way I always explained it to like people who try to like, why don't men get more involved? Why don't we have more men doing things? I've always tried to explain the idea that men are inherently doers, right? That's why we have the old joke that like you have to not try to fix your wife's problems, because instinctually as men, we hear it and we're like, okay, well, here's the solution, but that's not what our wives want out of us necessarily. Same thing is true in church, except in the church, we've almost made the opposite problem. We've not really communicated to men what is the value of following God now.
Yeah.
We've communicated, when you're dead, when you're gone, when it's over, here's what the value will be for you in eternal life and in those kinds of things. But how does this help me now? And what I've seen is the men who are involved, the ones who are like, they're on fire for it, are involved in working actively now. They're worship leaders, they're sound technician guys, they're doing something in the church which makes them active versus just sort of the nebulous, we're going to come, we're going to sing and listen to that guy talk for a little while.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I don't think our structure as a church lends itself towards engaging men in something that's bigger than just ushering.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, if you think about it, what we consider to be faithful men in many churches is, are you in attendance regularly?
Mm-hmm.
So are you there for the service? Are you serving as an usher or a deacon? Or are you doing doing the lawn?
Yeah.
And we're talking about a lot of these guys. Sometimes we'll take a CEO and say, "Hey, the best you can do here is to stand at the door and pass out bulletins." Don't get me wrong. I think if you can't hold a toilet brush, you shouldn't be leading.
Sure.
But for a guy that is driven and a guy that is in charge of multi-million-dollar corporations, to not give him a challenge bigger than that, and then say, "Look, this is the impossible. Go do it."
Mm-hmm.
I think they're just bored.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah.
There's no stimulation in that, and again, it's not about us. It's actually about the mission of God. What is greater than God saying, "Look, my plan is world domination with my glory."
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't say it that way, but
that's the essence of it. That's the truth of it. Yeah.
The whole earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So I think there needs to be a bigger call to men, and I think there needs to be an empowering and a sending out in a way that looks different than what we do.
I like the way you said that there's this idea of the church, and in some ways, it's a good thing to perpetuate, but it's not always the best phrasing. Like, say, everybody's a leader should be willing to come clean the toilets. Like, that's if you're really a dynamic leader, if that's what needs to be done and everything else is handled, I should be willing as the pastor to go do that. But just because I should be willing to do that doesn't mean the most effective use of me is to go do that particular thing. And how do we communicate that across to men, especially high functioning men? What I think in our world today, I don't like the terminology. We've started to term high value men.
Yeah.
How do you communicate that, like you say, to the CEOs, something like this, that there's actually value and your time and effort being put here?
I think it goes all the way back to the methodology of Jesus. He had the crowd, he had the core, but then he also had the small number. And I think there's some terminology that I was actually looking at this morning from a ministry called Core Discipleship. So that I kind of took that from there just out of memory, but I'm missing one. But essentially, he did not, ignore the giant crowds. He cared about them, and he spoke truth there. But he had 12 guys that he poured his life into. Then out of those 12, he had 4 of them that he said, "You know what? You're going to walk with me closer than anybody else." I think that if the church is going to empower men, they're going to have to get back to a 1-on-3, 1-on-4 discipleship model, to where, as the pastor, either whatever kind of pastor I am, I find 3 guys and I pour my life into them and I teach them. See, that's the key.
Yeah.
It's not just you're not a disciple unless you're a disciple making disciples.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
And the old argument is, well, which is more important, discipleship or evangelism? That's a dumb question.
Well, it's the old pendulum problem.
Yeah.
So you can swing it back and forth all you want, but it's really in the middle is what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because part of discipleship is conversion.
Yeah.
I actually believe that you start discipling a person before they ever come to faith in Christ. If you look at a scale, you have -10 and you have a 10 over here and 0 in the middle. If a guy's at a -9, you begin to, so people might say pre-evangelism or whatever, but ultimately, what is discipleship? Teaching someone to hear and obey the voice of God. Well, I can teach somebody who's not yet a believer to hear and obey the voice of God.
Okay.
I mean, why not, right?
Sure, yeah.
Because at some point, the goal is that they have this radical encounter with Jesus, and they say, "You know what? I've been hearing you, and I've been seeing you, and I've been trying to emulate you all, for some time. Now I've met you. Now that I met you, I've been supernaturally empowered with the Holy Spirit inside me to do."
So would you, like, just as an example of that scripturally, like you're talking like Cornelius, right? Who before Peter ever gets there,
Yeah.
He's already believing in God. Like, he's already starting to learn a little bit about it. He's not there yet, but he's starting to. And when Peter comes, okay, here, let me tell you what you've been missing, and here's the piece that you need to know to sort of go further in that walk.
Sure. I would even say Paul preaching at what was it? Athens.
Mars Hill, yeah, the Areopagus up there.
Yeah. You know, say I walked through your city and I saw all these idols and you had one inscription to the unknown God. Well, I'm here to tell you about the unknown God. That tells me that they had this sense that maybe there was something more. I think one of the mistakes we make is preachers, and I would even say just preachers. I would say as I want to be gentle. As those of us who love knowledge more than love.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
We think that somehow we are in control of somebody else coming to Christ.
Meaning that if we could just say it the right way or explain it the right way, they'd get it. And the fact they're not getting it is because I've failed to explain it correctly.
Either that, or I can be so good at explaining it, and I can be so convincing that my argument is just irrefutable, and you go, why didn't I see this before?
Well, that's a fallacy of logic, just even like outside of the Christian world, right?
Yeah.
Just because you think your logic is unassailable doesn't mean they're going to change their mind. Like, yeah, there are plenty of things, even like from my perspective, that I know in a discussion somebody else is probably right somewhere about halfway through a conversation. I'm not giving up on that. I'm going to keep fighting my own fight until I can humble myself to get to where I need to be.
I heard it said at one point, the older I get, and I think this is true for me, the older I get, the less I'm certain of.
Yes.
But the more certain I am of the things that I know. So in other words, I am more certain now than ever before that the Word of God is the Word of God, infallible, and all those other things. And I mean, it's life when you read it and let it read you, right? So there's no question about that in my mind. But I'm also less certain about how God works in the lives of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to be pretty dogmatic in my 30s that if you didn't, for instance, if you couldn't tell me a time and a place where you trusted Jesus, you're not born again. Because, I mean, do you know when you got married?
Yeah.
Do you know when your birthday is? You know, that was the way I was raised.
Mm-hmm.
Now I realize that, you know what? It's possible to actually love Jesus and surrender to Jesus and not know you did.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
Well, and I would ask you this.
Yeah.
When was Peter born again?
No, yeah. So I've
right?
yeah.
And I'm not saying you disagree, but I mean that's the.
I've had this same discussion with people before that like we tend to take a pinpoint notion to things. Like we like the and maybe Baptists in particular. I would say like Baptists.
We're the worst, man.
We're not the worst.
Yeah,
we're not the. It's not is it Pentecostal.
The
no, Presbyterian. Presbyterian are the worst. They're the most intellectually driven of the denominations. But Baptists are pretty bad about it. Where like we want it to be systematized and like, okay, this is the moment you did it. Like you say, you remember when you got married, you remember when you were born, like those kinds of things. And yet, if you're talking about just salvation generally, then you're probably saved long before you are actually saying the prayer to be saved, because you've already made that decision in your head. Now it's just a question of like acting out sort of the principles that you're living on. And so to that, I think there's a lot of truth there of who we're supposed to be in that.
Yeah, and so I've let go. I've let a lot go that I used to think that I had to understand, and maybe control is the right word, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
But I've started to trust that the Holy Spirit is a much better Holy Spirit than I am.
Well, I think I've said it this way just recently. In fact, in my head this morning, as I was listening to a debate about something, and I enjoy debates and things like that. But the way I sort of thought about it in my mind is that I have really begun to, as I get older, lean more into what Paul calls the mysteries of the gospel.
Yeah.
Lean much more to like, I used to lean on what I guess the Bible term, my own understanding. Yeah. And now I'm much more, like I said, I'm certain of the things I'm certain of. I know the things that I can be sure of. And then everything else, I've backed away and go, you know what? I can't possibly know God's mind on some of these things. I can just know what God has made me sure of. Let me ask you on the idea of like individual discipleship like that, or sort of small community discipleship. I was talking to a buddy of mine recently about sort of this idea. Do you think it's always been bad? I think we've sort of degraded ourselves down to sort of being group minded in our pastoring. But do you think social media has had an effect on that? Because I think what I've seen, at least, is that pastors have begun to think of themselves as pastors of the world rather than pastors of their flock first.
Yeah.
That we go on social media, we want our messages to be out there, we're sort of typing and having all these online discussions, and sometimes at the expense of, like I said, those just, why I'm trying to influence 1 million people when really God called me to influence these 3 who can then go out and influence more.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me because I could see it both ways.
Sure.
I don't think that we're ever. I say that's too large. I don't necessarily think that we're called to a particular people only.
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't think that you can ignore the people in front of you for the sake of the masses either. Because if you're called to shepherd a people, the people that God's given you, you're called to shepherd. So you can't ignore them. But we do live in a day where we can have amazing influence without ever leaving our office or our home. And so you might consider the social media part missions.
Yeah.
So I could see it both ways. I don't think, though, that you can ignore one or the other. I think it's a both and.
Well, and I think that's true of so many things. I used to joke when I taught and sort of got with people, especially when I was doing youth. That's one of my biggest bugaboo. So much of our world is built on this sort of pendulum effect in the church. I've seen it go through like the Baptist culture a lot, where we swing back to like discipleship, and then we realize that nobody's coming to know the Lord, and so we're like, oh no, now we need to do evangelism, and then we realize all of our people are too weak in their faith, and okay, we got to go back, and no one just stops to think, okay, well maybe we just need both of these things, but it just keeps swinging back and forth to the extremes.
Yeah, and isn't that funny too? Because you're not really a disciple unless you're sharing your faith.
Right.
But if you're not sharing your faith, you're also not being. I mean, it's two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. I think that what we're experiencing now is and we blame everything on COVID, but it's true. COVID was kind of like a great reset for the church.
Yeah, absolutely.
It shook us to our core, and I heard this said. I don't remember who said it where I was listening to it, but it's true. It didn't create problems as much as it revealed underlying problems that already existed, and we were just we were just medicating them.
Yeah.
And so we have to now deal with underlying issues that maybe we weren't willing to, or we weren't able to, or we just didn't have the thought to do so because things on the outside look good.
Yeah.
The bones of the church, I think, need to be really examined because what we've created as the church, the way we do church. Right?
Sure, the traditions more than the beliefs.
Yeah. We're going to really have to go back because we do not live in 1950 anymore. I mean, we know that, but the church has not really embraced that.
Well, I know you probably know the book, the Who Moved My Cheese?
Yeah.
There was a great redo of it for a quote-unquote spiritualizing, which is Who Moved My Pulpit, which I've also read. But there's a lot of truth in that, right? That almost as a church, we got stuck as that bad example of the person who's like, well, this is always where the cheese has been. One day the cheese will come back to this place. And rather than shooting out and going, okay, well, this seems to be lessening. I always use the example of VBS on this. And I say this as the lover of VBS. I went to VBS my whole life. There's still a place for some of that. But as I see VBS going on and on and on and on and on, it started in early 1900s, probably somewhere in the long time ago. And now every church does basically one of 3 VBSs. Yeah. They're all within about a month of each other. Yeah. And I would venture to say, if you looked at the numbers and you actually got names and you did all the rolls, that it's the same 1,000+ kids who are going to every VBS, and very few of those are sort of new people coming in or guests coming in. They're just, I need babysitters for this time during the summer. I'm going to take my kid here. Because I remember teaching VBS, and the kid's like, I already know this song. Yeah.
Oh, we did that story last week.
Yeah.
Well, of course you did, because you're... Yeah, and that's where it really comes challenging as a leader, because you have certain people in the church that say, no, this is God's ordained method to reach kids.
Yeah.
And I would totally agree with you. There is a place for it. some places.
That's right.
But our place, for instance, at First Baptist in Gulf Breeze. So what we found was it was an excruciating week for a few people because we were understaffed with volunteers, and we had a number of kids that virtually every one of them had already been to the Methodist church, they had already been to the Presbyterian church, they had already been to the non-denominational church, and depending on when we got it in, and Lord help us if we actually did it on the same week as another one. I mean, we're 3 mile radius everybody lives, right? So there's no way, we could compete with a church of 3,000. They're going to swallow us up. So we made a strategic decision. We're not doing VBS here. We're going to take it on the road to a neighborhood where there are no churches that are doing it. Yeah. And it was, we did it in a park, in a place where kids would come and play every day. And so we actually moved most all of our children's ministry off-site to this neighborhood. Totally different than the demographic of people in our neighborhood, but it was incredibly fruitful. Now, we didn't necessarily see the numbers to where we could go, we had 1,000 people saved, and we had this. Sure. So it cost us. But we did see some really cool fruit out of it that we think we honor Jesus from it.
Well, and some of it's just, even if it's unfruitful in that sense, right? Yeah. And that's not a great measure. Numbers or any of those things aren't necessarily a good metric because for the sake of one, we should be glad to go out and do. Yeah. But some of that benefit comes from just the willingness and the training into your people that it's okay to do it a different way or to try something new or to do something. Because I remember so much of the aspect of changing things in churches came down to the point of well, if you didn't have, it's not that you couldn't do something new, but you have to do something new and keep doing this thing that I love. Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. You want to do something other than VBS? That sounds great. We're gonna still do VBS on this week, and now if you want to add another week over here to do something, I'm not gonna come help you. None of the people that did VBS are gonna come help you, but you could do that. And the idea that we can just keep adding on things is a problem. So we just recently in our church at First Baptist Beulah realized that our Wednesday night was just dead. For our adults, it was dead. For our youth, they're still going strong, and they still meet on Wednesday nights. And I used to be, as I said, very dogmatic of the idea of if you're just dropping off your kid for youth night, if you love Jesus, you'd be here. And if you're dropping off your kid, you're just a bad Christian who just wants a babysitter for whatever. Some of that would change my heart when I had kids. Yeah. But
I'm just tired.
I'm just tired, man. I want my kid to know something, but I'm tired. I've been going all week. Yeah. But we just recently changed our adult Sunday school, our adult Wednesday night to the morning. And we've tripled our numbers by doing it. And it took a lot of, our people were very concerned about what do you mean you're not going to do an adult Wednesday night on Wednesday night? What do you mean? Well, we were having the same 3-4 people who were there each and every Wednesday night. And those were great, faithful people. And I'd sit there and have Bible study with those 3-4 people every time. But if we have a limited number of time in the earth that we're here, can we use this time more effectively? And now we've doubled, tripled, doing it on Wednesday morning. Our youth still meet Wednesday night. It also gives me an opportunity to help our youth leader, be in there with him on the night and pour into that ministry a little bit more. And there's just some good to that. But it does take sort of pulling teeth sometimes to get those changes made.
I think as a leader of a church, we've got to be willing to kill anything that doesn't bear fruit and we're not called to. Because I say that because sometimes we're called to something that doesn't bear immediate fruit.
Sure.
But God said, because there's seasons. There's seasons for preparing the land. There's seasons for plowing, for planting the seed, for watering and weeding, and then the harvest. All we want to see is the harvest. Yeah. But if God said do it, you better do it. But if it's not something that God specifically spoke and said, hey, this is what I'm calling you to do, we got to be willing to kill it. Because all it's doing is sucking time and energy, resources, and we don't have any margin that way. Yeah. So it's.
And you've talked about this sort of separately in different things. Of one of the biggest things when I came to our church that hadn't really been done, and I think a lot of churches do poorly, big and small across the board. And you do some work with actual pastors and churches sort of around the area through what you do now. And it's interesting to hear your perspective on this. Is a lot of what happens the idea that we don't set measurable goals for a lot of our events. So like it's hard to know if it's bearing fruit because we've never sat down and said, what does success in this particular event or ministry or whatever look like?
Yeah, measurable goals are always hard for me because I always want to look and say, okay, the measurable goal was I faithful?
Okay.
Because to me, faithfulness over fruitfulness is always the goal. Because I can't control the fruit. I can only control the faithfulness. And so, but if I'm not careful, that can be a cop-out to actually say, is this faithfulness or is this my pet project? Is this something that I want to do? The heart is deceitful above all else. So
That's right.
We will always deal with ego. We'll always, and if you're a visionary and a dreamer and, sky's the limit, man, there's 1,000 ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I just throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks. And I've tried to be more disciplined about saying, okay, that's a great idea, but it's not the right time, or it's not better than another idea. It's hard.
Do you find, so like I have a similar issue where like I want to just throw ideas at the wall and man, this would be great, this would be
like
great.
a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're just gonna do this thing and we'll see what happens, right? Yeah. So, but the end result is I always have to go back to like my wife because I've never been in a church where I had a secretary, but I go to my wife and I've joked with her before, like I am too dumb to know whether or not my ideas are good or bad. So I have loads of ideas, and some of them are brilliant, and other ones are idiotic. And I need someone there to just balance that out and go, okay, this sounds like a good idea, or hey, explain that a little bit more because there may be something there, or just, no, this is not going to work. That's a dumb idea.
Yeah, so you hit on a huge point because the majority of pastors in America are solo pastors or small staff pastors. So one of the ministries I'm starting, it's not really a ministry, it's more of a mission to reach 1 million men. Another thing that I'm doing is I've really gotten into the leadership space to try to develop leaders who build leaders.
Yeah.
And my heart is for pastors, and to be honest with you, most of it's come out of my own failures. Sometimes we're the best at things that we failed at and
Sure.
finally realized and grabbed some tools. But what I've come to believe and I've discovered is that you're only as good as the team that you have around you. And nobody is in themselves enough. I'm not talking about eternal security and identity. Sure. I'm talking about there's a reason that there's a fivefold ministry given to the church. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. None of us is all five.
That's right.
Now, we might cycle through and God give. I happen to believe that you could be strong in the apostolic gifts, the missionary gifts, and then God may switch you over to a prophetic. I don't see where there's any biblical command of you're going to get one and that's all you're going to get the rest of your life.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, maybe not. I don't know. But I'm saying none of us is enough to lead the body. That's why there's five.
Mm-hmm.
And so with those five, there's also different temperaments and personalities. I'm a consultant with a company called Giant Worldwide, and we build tools to help leaders grow and scale. And we do this thing called 5 Voices. I don't know if I've talked to you about this before.
Just in very brief.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's 5 voices, and those 5 voices, starting from the lowest voice. Man,
that's got a helicopter or something. I'm telling you.
Helicopter.
You get what you get. That's
I love it. My ADD's not peeking out at all. So you've got the nurturers. They're present-minded, and they are people-oriented. So they make decisions based on how is this going to make another person feel? What's this going to do to what we've got going on now? So they're golden. By the way, 42% of the population, 43% of the population would be nurturers.
Is that the biggest component? I'm assuming. Yeah.
The majority of the people, by number, percentage-wise, in our churches are nurturers.
Yeah.
They're feelers. They're not thinkers. That doesn't mean they don't think, but they...
Yeah, it always feels weird when you say that. Like, they're not thinkers, they're feelers, but they mean...
People.
Yeah.
They lead with feeling, their care. So the next one is creative. and this is going to be 9% of the population. And these creatives are going to be future oriented, but they're going to be concentrating on people as well, or actually not people. They're going to be well. They're looking at the future.
Yeah.
And I say people in logic because this one's an interesting one because it's always connected. So there's like a split with the creative. So it's either future people or future in logic, right?
Yeah.
The third one is the guardian. These are the ones who are always worried about dotting the I's and crossing the T's. They're the ones that keep you out of jail.
Yeah.
Because they ask a billion questions, and they are present-minded, and they're concerned about the integrity of what you've got. They're concerned about the past and honoring it. Then the next one you've got are connectors. They're the ones who know somebody who knows somebody.
Yeah.
And they're all about people, and they're all about making sure that I've got what you need over here, and amazing people. By the way, they're going to be 11% of the population. And way on the other side is pioneer. Pioneers are the futurists. They're the vision casters. They're the big picture people. The win is most important. Here's why I'm saying all this.
Yeah.
No pastor is going to be a pioneer and a nurturer as
Right.
their strength.
Absolutely.
So here's the problem. 43% of the population is going to be nurturer. And by the way, if you take nurturer, creative, and guardian, and you put them together, that's 82% of your church is going to be those three. Those are the three that are the quietest in terms of speaking, in terms of a level of being heard.
Yeah.
So 82%, and this is actually scientific. We've done the research. 82% feel misunderstood or not heard.
But they're not going to say anything about it because
Nope.
they're also the quietest group. Or
The
rarely.
guardians are going to say something about it.
They're going to speak for the whole group.
And they're going to say something about it basically by drilling you with questions. It's rapid fire interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
But I say that to say, if a pioneer is the only guy leading, and he doesn't have a guardian to keep him out of jail, and he doesn't have a nurturer to help him know how everybody else feels, he's going to run away and leave everybody behind.
Yeah.
This was my problem. You know, basically, what's it like to be on the other side of you? Well, if you're a nurturer, you're not pioneering. You're not building a future. You're here and now. You're resistant to change most of the time.
Yeah.
So all of this is because as pastors, we've got to build a team that complements all five voices so that everybody's heard and everybody's understood. When we have that, we have a powerful army in God's people.
How do you?
Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. So it harkened back to something Alistair Begg, who I know is going out of vogue right now, but Alistair Begg has said back in the day when he just talked about change in the church, and he made the point that you've got a vast majority of people, something like 40%, to his mind, what he did with his study, are fence sitters. They're waiting to see where the wind blows in any discussion. And if it goes your way, I've been with you from the beginning. And if it goes against you, well, they were with those guys. You've got about 5% of people who are going to be they're gung-ho with you. Like, if you're going to change, or we're ready, let's do this. And then you've got a more larger subset between those who are against you no matter what, and those who are certainly hesitant to make any changes until they see the fruit of it. And so it made me think of that. How much of being misunderstood, because this is what I found in my own life. There's a group of people, and I'd be interested to know which category you'd put them in, who equate being understood or being heard with you going with their idea. So I've had that like in ministries myself, where you're like, okay, we're having this meeting. I've absolutely heard you. I try to ask questions back to people so that they understand that I know where you're coming from and I can get where you're going. But then when the decision's made and it doesn't go their way, I've had literally a lady storm out of a meeting yelling, "Well, you just didn't even listen to me," and walk out. So how do you bridge that gap between it going your way means you've been listened to versus just you've heard them?
So two responses to that. One, I think all five leading voices, or leading from any of those five voices, could produce that.
Sure. Yeah.
Very rarely will a pioneer say that, because usually a pioneer is going to be louder than everybody else, and he or she's going to be one that's going to have the ideas anyways, but or at least driving things, right?
Yeah.
The second way I would answer that is, that's an instance that is a symptom of a problem.
Okay.
So they really wanted you to do what they said because they haven't feel heard or understood in the past.
Okay.
And so it just has come to the surface. In general, if people know that you really get them, and you really did hear them, in general, people go, yeah, okay. As long as you understood me and you gave me a chance to say my piece.
Do you think that comes from the sort of like more personal interaction rather than the large group interaction? So do people feel like you understand them more if you've gone out to eat with them? We've had a private conversation. Now when we're in the meeting, you may be frustrated by what I'm saying, but at least, like, well, we've had dinner. I understand where he's going from. I know that he understands where I'm coming from.
Yeah, so our church polity background is Southern Baptist.
Sure.
Which means business meetings.
Oh, yeah. Committees and business meetings, man.
Oh, my gosh.
Potlucks, committees, and business meetings. That's what we got.
So I think what happens in business meetings, this is experiential.
Sure.
It's anecdotal. I think what happens is the people that speak in the business meetings are going to be the pioneers and the guardians. The guardians are going to want to hold people to the fire, nuts and bolts. Tell me how this bridge is going to be built. Who's going to pay for it? When's it going to be done? Question. The pioneers are going to be visioning. Man, we could do this.
And the answers from them to the guardians are going to be, we'll figure that out.
Exactly.
We'll get there. Like, don't worry about that.
We don't need brakes. Let's just get the car going, and we'll build the brakes once we're rolling.
Yeah.
Right? Because rolling is more important. And because of that, most of the people in the meeting aren't going to say anything. They're going to think things, but they're not going to say them. But they're going to leave with an impression of who was right and who was wrong. And that's going to be determined usually by who was the loudest and who was the most persuasive. I never cease to be amazed when I listen to a talk show, one of those radio shows, Rush Limbaugh or Ramsey or any of these guys. A person can call in with a really hard-driven point, and in about 42 seconds, they are 180 degrees out of what they started saying.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah.
All it takes is a really good host to convince them another way. Now, that doesn't mean that they actually are in agreement, but verbally they are.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of what's his name? Negotiator Chris Voss.
I know who you're talking about.
So,
yeah.
He says that you're not trying to get people to say you're right. He's trying to get people to say in negotiation that's right, because you're right is just verbal consent that really doesn't mean that they agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's right is not about you. It's about the argument itself. And so I think in a business meeting, you have a whole lot of your rights, not a whole lot of that's right.
So if we took it like out of the Southern Baptist context, right? We take it out of the business meeting, we take it out of the potlucks and committees and all the different things that we have as Southern Baptists. If you could restructure the church in this way.
Are you trying to get me fired?
I'm trying to get you kicked out. You don't have a church right now. It's
Man,
fine.
people can leave. I'm a heretic. I'm a liberal.
Are you even allowed to go to the national convention now? They got a picture of you at the front. They got a picture.
Yeah.
But if you could just restructure it, like, how are we going to do this? Because I'll be honest, I've been to one national convention. It frustrated the heck out of me.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
And I'm going to go to this one because it's, if nothing else, it's sort of the old popcorn scenario from my generation, right? I'm just there to watch what's going on and how it burns a little bit. But if you could just restructure, say, we're not going to do this business meeting style anymore because it lends to this problem, how would you structure it so that people feel heard and visions can be cast?
I don't think you can do the national convention that way.
No, but even just a local church.
A local church.
Yeah.
I think for a local church, it starts with a healthy culture.
Okay.
A healthy culture starts with a healthy leader who builds healthy leaders, plural. And that's going to be both paid staff and the staff who aren't paid. So the people who are leading the church have got to be healthy, and they set the culture. They set the tone. A healthy culture is one where people are valued,
Mm-hmm.
where process is honored, but where the mission is super, super clear.
Okay.
And that is not done in a large group meeting. That's done around a table where there's more listening than there is speaking. And so it's my contention that most churches are extremely unhealthy in their
I don't think that's wrong. Yeah.
because the culture is unhealthy. And at the end of the day, it all goes back to who's the senior leader, leaders plural. So what would I do?
Mm-hmm.
Man, I'd have a church of one.
That makes the decision making a lot easier.
But then we would probably split, and I'd go start another church because I couldn't get along with myself, right? No, what I do is I would just take the time to build slowly and broadly a foundation of leaders who would own the vision and walk together hand in hand with an extreme commitment to the mission and to the unity of the church. That's what I think I would do. I think that's a plurality of elders.
Okay.
I would not have business meetings every month for the church to decide stuff.
Right.
But I would have regular family meetings for us to celebrate things.
So, just as a pushback here on this, some church life stuff annoys me in this regard. And so I'm interested to know what your distinction is when we say things like, we're not going to have Sunday school anymore. We're going to have connection groups. And you're like, okay, what's it? No. They're going to be life groups. No, they're going to be like, and you ask the question, say, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to study the Bible together. Isn't that what we were doing? Yes, that's what we were doing there.
But it's different.
But it's different because it's connection now instead of Sunday school, which has a connotation or whatnot. So when you talk about business meeting versus family meeting versus, what's the distinction in your mind between actual difference?
The distinction in my mind is that I don't think it's a forum to make decisions.
Okay.
I think it's a forum for conversation and celebration. I think we should celebrate and clarify in those meetings more so than decide. Because, I mean, let's think about it. Forgive my jaded mindset, but who thought the idea was good to get 100 people in a room, throw stuff up and say, let's make a decision on this? Because 49 loses to 51.
Mm-hmm.
49 people are going to leave as losers.
Yeah.
That's not leadership. That's decision by majority. I mean, look at our own country. That's where. So, but you can't operate on another model unless there's extreme trust, extreme integrity, and extreme accountability. So if you have those things, I think that's a better biblical model.
So does that take? So I'll use my own church as an example. So I've used. I came in. Church was about 20 people. We're running about 80 now on Sunday. Man, God's
you should be in a church growth magazine.
Look, I don't know. It's not me, certainly.
Was there a church split and they needed a new place?
I know. It wasn't a church split. It wasn't anything. It was mostly COVID. The church population was getting older, all this kind of things. And I just have a heart for people. I'd have to take your test or whatever it is to clarify what place I'm in. But certainly I tend to be a visionary in the sense that I like to start things, and then after they've been going a while, I get bored. And I move on to start something else. That's sort of a pattern in my life that I have to quell.
That's your kryptonite.
That's my kryptonite, yeah. Is that like once it becomes process, I'm out. I'm done. I don't want to be in a process anymore. But so all that being said, I also love people, and I want to connect with people. And so one of the big things I've always done, and I do in the church now, is go into every ministry as often as I can, even ones that are non-ministerial in that regard, and try to connect with all the different groups we have at our church that are independent. So I've gone over and sat with our quilters and had lunch with them. I've gone and played games with our game playing ladies who play on one day of the week. I've sat in with our youth ministry and hung out with the students. And I try to do that. And it was said to me one time, because this church is 140 years old, some of our quilters have been there
100 of them?
I don't want to say, I don't want to say 100 of them, but they've been there a while. And one lady made the comment, I'm the first pastor they've ever had that's come and sat in the quilters and taken some time to sit over there with them.
Now, we know that may not necessarily be true.
Correct, yeah.
But
may just
it could be true.
Yeah. But so, certainly what it means is true is that it was such a rarity that this stuck out.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the question from that is that a way then to build sort of more that family model? Hey, look, the pastor's here. He's trying to connect with everybody. I'm not a quilter. I've never sat down and quilted with them. In fact, I constantly tease them in our business meetings about how much lunch they eat versus how many quiltings they make. But we can all laugh about it and enjoy that conversation. There's always a good giggle when I come into the quilting area. It's like, whoa, oh, everybody quick, get to work. That kind of thing. So is that sort of how you forge those familial bonds, or is there a better way to do that then?
Yeah, so another one of the tools that we teach is support and challenge, how important both of them are. So support would be the I'm for you attitude. It's the encouragement. It's the resourcing. I'm with you. I'm not against you. That's support. Challenge is there's something more. There's something greater. There's an accountability. There's a calling up. And so my goal is to be a liberator, which means I offer high support and high challenge to every person in my life. That's the goal. I don't always succeed.
Sure.
Matter of fact, I often fail at it. But to be a liberator means I'm fighting for your highest possible good always. That's what Jesus did. That's what Galatians 6:10 tells us to do. And so if I'm going to be challenging you, I have to start with support. Because if I challenge without support, I'm dominating you.
Okay.
And you see me as a dictator. You see me as a control freak. You see me as a person who doesn't care about you. On the flip side, if I support you but don't challenge you, then I'm in protect mode, and there's a mistrust and an entitlement that's there. So here's what's interesting about that. Oftentimes we will live in one square or another. Usually it's protect or dominate, but we live in the high support, low challenge. And then at some point we go, you know what? This guy's got to do something. So we flip. Now we take away all support and it's all challenge.
It's against that pendulum. We go all the way back and forth. Yeah.
Exactly. Because we weren't offering both, which is liberating.
Yeah.
We go from one to the other, and people get all upset because it's like, you're just a dictator. No, I've just been patient for 2 years and I haven't challenged you from the very get-go. And that's where we get ourselves in trouble. We don't offer both the support and the challenge, but you always start with support. Especially, now, it's kind of unfair that we're using this terminology because it's brand new,
Sure.
and it does take some time to get it. But for a pioneer, you don't really need a lot of support for them.
Yeah, they're going to go do their thing.
Yeah,
That's who they are.
Yeah, you don't got to worry about encouraging them. I mean, they're gonna say, hey, you're either coming or you're not, right? Get on the bus or get off. But for a nurturer, buddy, you better be asking how their mom is doing, how grandma's shingles are doing. And we oftentimes jump over that for the sake of the mission. And that is a death nail, because relationship for a nurturer always trumps mission. Always. If we're not in relationship, I'm not going with you. Period. End of story. And if you drag me with you because it's my job, I'll do just enough to do my job, but I'm not giving you anything extra, and you're not going to get the best out of me. So that's a long way around to answer your question. Supporting is primary. People matter. Because when people matter, people are heard, people are understood, and when they're heard and understood, they give you the very best of themselves because they trust you and because they want to be with you.